at that point, that is going to go viral in a heartbeat. You're not going to have time to go back and clean up your social media. And
people are going to go immediately to their social account while they're on their phone, right? We're going to talk a lot about this thing. People are going to jump on this thing. You're not going to have, to your point, I think you're so right. And are you ready, right? My old coach used to say, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready.
Be the story.
All right. So Keith, for high school athletes starting out, what's the first thing they should do to begin getting involved and potentially making money with NIL?
That's a great question to get us kicked off here. I think, first thing is you have to look at what platforms are you going to use? Are you going to be restrictive to yourself? Are you only going to use X? Are you only going to use Instagram? Are you only going to use Facebook? And I think that's a common mistake when I talk to students. I only want to be on Instagram. Well, by making that choice, you're restricting your potential audience. So I think broadening that scope and starting to build an audience while you are in high school and getting folks on board. So
real quick though, what do they need to check with their state? There's 50 states. It's so complicated. I mean, I just know questions that some parents are asking. How do parents address that at the high school level?
Some states allow NIL. There's quite a big following, quite a big population of states that are allowing NIL. My recommendation, though, regardless if you are in that type of state that does allow for NIL at the high school level, is you still need to be plotting and planning. You still need to be strategic in getting that groundswell of support. So when you do make that transition to college, you've already got a great base.
I love it. And I think you're so right. Like you said earlier, just really developing, and we're going to walk people through that today. How do you storytell? How do you create, content across all the platforms and doing all of that? And I think you're so right. Checking with your local state regulations. And so that brings us really to college athletics, right? Like, what about college athletes, Keith? What steps should they make? Because I know student athletes are sitting here, they're seeing this tremendous opportunity. But as we're going to talk about today, there's some steps they need to take to begin. What are some of the first steps, the easy things that they can do to get started today?
Yeah, and I you've mentioned it before, Jay, that feeling of being overwhelmed.
Right.
Don't be overwhelmed, first off. I think that's the first tip. Don't be overwhelmed. Take this step by step. I think as you look at the NIL opportunities, look at what resources your school has already. Your school, most universities, we're seeing it at the junior college level. We're even seeing it at the high school level. But check out what resources they have. Those administrators, those coaches, they've worked already to find some different opportunities for you, whether it be an online marketplace platform, whether it be a co-branded merchandise platform. There are already going to be some things where you don't have to come in and recreate the wheel.
So they should go find those people in there. What you're saying, they've got the resources, they've got the NIL marketplace, they've got all of the contracts, right? Where should they go specifically, like within the athletic department, from your experience?
It depends on the level of school. I think I always like going to the compliance officer. Most schools have a compliance officer. At the Division III, Division II level, they often have a staff member that's a coach, and they're also being the compliance officer.
Gotta love it.
I love the smaller university setting where you're gonna wear those different hats. But I think identifying those folks who are coordinating and in control of a lot of those different things is a key thing. Because not only to identify those resources, but you ultimately are going to need to know how to disclose legally to your university any NIL activity you have.
And so they can go. The people on campus already know this. Students don't have to worry about it. These folks will walk them through, will take their hand, and walk them through this process. So there's no reason for people to be worried about all of that. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you're going to a school at the D1 level that it might be a bigger school, they they're likely going to have some sort of NIL liaison. They're going to have
Right.
some sort of general manager or somebody like that. And, starting off with them and just exploring, you're starting off creating this relationship with whomever it is at the university, finding out what resources are available. What do I have to do to disclose things? But getting it straight from the horse's mouth, sort of say.
No, I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah. So you're talking about, and let's take a step further, right? You're talking about getting in touch with the NIL office, which is typically going to be through the compliance officer. Some people have general managers. Just depends on your budget. Some schools don't have that, but they do have someone that if students ask, they'll identify, hey, this person in our athletic department or campus, to talk about that. And that brings me to a good point, right? Because we know student athletes are going to want to get out there in any sort of a content creator and make content. What steps can students make to make sure they're not maybe stepping on the toes of the university, right? Who typically is going to have deals in place, right? As many fans go out and you see, and you look at the scoreboard, you look around the ribbon boards, you look around the football, softball, basketball arenas, they've already got sponsors, right? How can students avoid, know what that process and that landscape is and the opportunities that exist?
Yeah, and I think you're hitting on a really good point because most state laws, they actually give that institution, that university, the right to nix a deal.
Right.
If if there is some sort of conflict with the sponsorships, there is that ability. So I think you're approaching this with the right mindset, Jay. I love this line of discussion because it is really important. If a student athlete goes and they work out a deal with a shoe company, for example,
right.
But the university has a big deal.
Right. Which is common, right? And think about this. Some of the schools are probably going to think, if you don't know any better, you could get yourself maybe in a little, well, it won't be trouble because it probably won't, the deal might get nixed before it publishes, right? But an opposing opponent to the primary shoe company may say, X company, I don't want to give out names, may say, hey, we could sneak in and work with this athlete, right? And those things happen, right, Keith?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you don't want to waste the time, the energy on a deal that's more than likely going to be an issue at the tail end. So I think
that probably will never come to fruition, the final deal. Right.
I hate to use the term, but you got to do your homework first, right? Do your homework first.
I'm getting triggered already. You're bringing me back to school when you mention homework.
Oh man. Well, I'll tell you, I think looking at a university, going through any of their sort of marketing department, any of their development department, however they phrase it at the different university, anything that talks about their corporate sponsorship structure and different things like that, I think that's a good starting point. Identify who is already a corporate sponsor. I know a lot of schools are very sensitive. They don't want their student athletes going out and, in a sense, double tapping those corporate sponsors because, a little bit of, feels, poaching. I like that. But at the same time, as a student athlete, if your university has a deal with the shoe company, don't automatically assume I'm just going to go approach this other shoe company.
Absolutely.
I think we got to use a little common sense here.
And schools, right? Just to jump in here, schools are, some of these athletic brands are already accustomed to work with people on the campus, right? Like oftentimes a school will have a primary apparel provider. And then oftentimes they have deals, depending on the size of the school, with, oftentimes the head coaches, right?
Yeah.
And the staffs oftentimes, right? A lot of these schools now have deals that a part of their sponsorship is providing a certain level of gear to all the athletic staff. So does that mean that there's also, Keith, I guess a question for you is, are there opportunities, right? Because the brands are just out there, we know, to get their brand out there further.
Yeah, it's all about relationships. Just like any business, Jay, it's about relationships. I think starting basis, you hit on something really critical here. Talk to your coaches too. I know they might not be your NIL administrator at the school, coaches know how to sell themselves. They know how to read between the lines. But talk to your folks that are there on campus. Start start understanding the lay of the land.
Right.
And that's your starting point.
Yeah. Yeah,
Start
it's all
there.
about, like you said, relationships near and afar. If you love the content that you're hearing so far, follow us on social media for more behind the scenes content, updates, and more engaging conversations. And so that brings us to a question I have for you, right? I think we know that on campuses and every roster, there are different kinds of athletes, and you have what I would call the rising star versus the established star, right? And I think from a content perspective, we know that they have different opportunities, both equally beneficial. We'll get into content and creation later, but we know, for example, the person who's a walk-on even on some of your teams have a great perspective and access to storytelling and documenting their life. And then stars have tremendous opportunities, right? That we know people who are getting a lot of coverage, that a lot of people would love to see the behind the scenes. What is your recommendation from an NIL perspective when, how should, for example, that rising star, right, the people who just landed on campus, handle NIL versus the established star, whether that's a 50-year senior or someone who's come in and established themselves?
Well, one of the things I really enjoy is I love living vicariously through these student athletes, okay? As I think most fans do, as I think families do. Members of your church, they want to live vicariously through you.
Yeah.
They want to feel connected to your journey. So I think whether you're the rising star, you're fifth year senior, whether you're a walk-on coming onto the team for the first time, people want to know your journey. They want
Right.
to
Absolutely.
they want to feel like they're part of it. So I think as you approach how you use social media, invite people in.
Yeah.
Give them a window into, let them sit on that passenger seat next to you and feel like they're part of this journey with you. Yeah.
I think that, Keith, you just hit on, sorry to jump in. I think you hit on a key point, because one of the things you and I constantly talk about is people being their authentic selves, right? And just being that rather than trying to be something other than what they are. And I think there's such a huge and unleveraged opportunity in an organic social media, right? I mean, think about this. Most people are one post away from going viral, or 6 months away, or a year away of just being consistent to living the life of their dreams. And one of the reasons, kind of where I'm going with this, is part of the things too, as a former athlete, we always talk about, don't make mistakes that are self-defeating, right? Like don't torpedo your own ship. And so my question for you is, what are some of the precautions that student athletes can take, right? And what are some of those key takeaways? Because with this tremendous opportunity, we also have to make sure that we don't hit some of those stumbling blocks. What are you seeing out there? What are some things that student athletes should really be cautious of, or just say, hey, these are some things that oftentimes I'm hearing a lot of questions about?
Yeah. I think you nailed it though. You're one video from going viral, or you're one play from being the highlight of the day and all the national news networks, something. So my big question to those student athletes is, are you ready? Are you prepared for that?
I love that.
Are you ready for that moment?
Yeah.
Because the moment those things happen, I think in the back a lot of student athletes' minds is, I'll have time to clean up my stuff and get ready.
Absolutely.
But most of these moments are unplanned. They happen and you don't even know they're going to happen.
Right.
And we'll take a great example is you make a one-handed catch for a touchdown that captures the nation's attention.
Right.
Okay. At that point, that is going to go viral in a heartbeat. You're not going to have time to go back and clean up your social media. And
people are going to go immediately to their social account while they're on their phone, right? We're going to talk a lot about this thing. People are going to jump on this thing. You're not going to have, to your point, I think you're so right. And are you ready, right? My old coach used to say, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready.
Yeah. So have your stuff ready now.
Yeah.
Be ready. I mean, everybody, I think most people want to be famous. Most people want to become known in a very positive way that drives, some sort of business, some sort of monetary gain.
Yeah.
But I think, are you prepared? Are you ready for that? And when I
Yeah.
look at student athletes, when I work with them, if somebody was to go to your social media right now,
Yeah.
what are they going to see?
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
good? Is it positive? Is it negative?
That's a
If
great
it's
point.
if it's negative, I mean, I'm not talking about, hey, go get your stuff ready so we can look at it in an hour. I'm talking about right now. If we go look at it, is there going to be something
Right.
on there the fan base, the customer, a potential customer would see that would turn that person off? And if the answer is yeah, there is something, then address it now. Don't wait till an
Yeah.
hour after you've gone viral on a national news network for a one-handed catch.
Yeah.
Too late. Too
Well, let
late.
me let me ask you about some other things. I was scrolling through my feed before I was getting up yesterday, actually, and it was a content creator. He had around almost 300,000 followers, right? Pretty substantial. So regular, not a non-athlete, but someone who talks on a particular topic. And one of the things he was talking about is that most content creators who get started don't understand the major tax implications of being a content creator. Keith, talk about that. How should student athletes and anyone creating content, how should they be thinking about this?
Yeah. I want to tread the line because everybody's situation with taxes and what they bring
Sure.
in terms of income is going to be a little bit different. So it's tough on something like this to give something very specific. Number one, I think, depending on how much value, how much revenue you're thinking that you're going to derive from this, you're definitely going to want to talk to some sort of tax professional. But
Right.
rules of thumb. I'll
Yeah.
give you some rules of thumb.
And that's just sound advice, right? You're not saying I'm giving you tax advice. You're saying if you're going to do this, you probably should be thinking about taxes going into this and talk to a professional who does this all the time.
Plan to be successful.
Yeah.
Let's go. All right. So if you're going to make over $600, you're going to enter this rule of thumb bracket. I like to, 10%.
I hate to keep it doing this, but that's actually not that difficult to do, right? I mean,
No, yeah,
$600, the opportunity for many people, they can, I don't like to use the word easily, but I think with effort and consistency, would you say that people can surpass that $600 mark
yeah.
that you're talking about?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think so. So I think withholding 10%. So when you're bringing something in, make sure you're not spending it right away.
Yeah.
One of my favorite follows is Shaq. He's got a great
Yeah.
He's got a great tidbit, a great story about his beginning of his NBA career. He signed a contract. He went and spent it all, and he forgot about Uncle Sam. Okay, don't go
Yeah,
spend it all. Make sure
I've
you're
seen that. Yeah, I've seen him talking about that.
yeah, it's a fantastic little tidbit. Now, if you're going to make more than $10,000, rule of thumb is 30%. You want to
Right.
withhold more. So the more you make,
Yeah.
the more you want to hold back. Okay.
Right.
So don't go celebrate right away when you get a big deal or you make some money from NIL. Don't go spend it right away.
So Keith, Uncle Keith is saying, don't spend all your money.
Oh man.
Hey, I also on the flip side, there's also expenses too, right? That's keeping it up. If you if you upgrade a phone, maybe you have an old phone, you said, hey, I want to create content. This one, maybe you cracked it, whatever. Even if you cracked it, the repairs. If you buy some of the tripods that a lot of content creators have, right? These are expenses related to content creation. And again, not giving tax advice because we're not tax professionals, but we're saying track them, keep your expenses, because then you can take them to, right, the tax professional for them to make the decision, because we're not tax professional.
Yeah, and I one of the first tidbits of advice when I go to a campus and I'm talking to a crowd of student athletes is, if you're not familiar with an Excel document, start getting familiar. Start writing all this stuff down.
Yeah. Even if it's just a note screen, right, on your iPhone or whatever device you have, right?
Yeah, and if you're paying $20 to your buddy to help you with a graphic, mark it down.
Or to even, right? Some people are also paying people to record them to record the TikTok dances, right? Maybe it's a roommate, they're giving them some money, right?
Yeah.
To just film it, because sometimes you do need people, and some people are paying people to help them.
I'd love to see if you got a TikTok dance, Jay.
You know what? If I did, it would be I'm the least talented dancer in my family. That's
Oh,
a fact. That's a,
oh,
which
oh.
speaks one to their dancing ability and also to mine. So
See, I'm Brand&Athlete. You're not only going to get great tips, but you're going to get
yeah.
a little dose of the human element of me ribbing Jay a little bit, and maybe him ribbing me.
No, it's so true. And speaking of which, right, we're just being in our conversations, relationship in this show, just being authentic. And that I think that's one of the things. Talk about that a little bit. I think there is what I call the social media oftentimes is the highlight reel of people's lives, right? And what I think any of us know is that is very difficult um to do and being consistent over time. But being your authentic self, being real, like maybe, like for example, Keith, you are a fisherman, like you love to fish, like creating content around that is authentic because that's just something like people don't know. For example, you have reels that you collect, that you go out shoot, fishing on a regular and consistent basis. Like that's real, as opposed to trying to be something you're not. So, what are some things that you're seeing about authenticity? I ask that because so oftentimes you're getting brands reaching out to you, say, hey, we have a campaign and we have some athletes we're looking for. And so that authenticity, right? Because we know that's so key. How are you seeing that come through? And what's, again, because we're talking about here, things to avoid. What tip would you have about things to avoid?
Yeah, I think the more somebody feels like they know you,
Yeah.
Your line of questioning is great because, think about if you're in a hiring position at a company and you got two candidates in front of you. All right. And on paper, you see one person and their personality really doesn't shine through that
Right.
much in paper. Right. And as you're talking to them, you don't get a good feel for who they are as a person. Second person comes in, they've got a great resume on paper and they're talking to you and you get a great feeling for their personality. Okay, chances are that second person is likely going to get hired because
Right.
there's more of a connection. There's
Yeah.
something resonates because their personality is coming through. It's the same thing with using social media for NIL. All
Right.
right. These companies that are out there hiring or fans that want to buy merchandise, they want to connect with that student athlete. They
Yeah.
want to feel like they know that student athlete and they don't want to throw their support behind somebody that potentially is going to make a bad decision or be a risk and do something that makes them look bad for
Right.
supporting
Right.
you. Right.
Right. No, I
And
love it. No, I think that's so true. And I think too, like on that authenticity trip, I think on the brand side, when someone is themselves, then the brand content plays out better on the influencer's channel, right?
yes.
Like if you're so let's say because then what happens, like just making this show, we go from theory to actionable steps. If again we use an example of you and the fisher being a fisherman, then hey, a fishing company may say, or a local outdoor store near you, or the Parks and Rec board, whomever may come to you say, hey, Keith, would you be a part involved in this campaign? We'd love to help get youth out to the creeks and in the rivers and in the streams. That and then you're already doing that. That's going to work because people already know, hey, Keith is a fisherman, right? It's not just something that you were asked, in the business on the sports marketing side, they call it label slapping, right? Which is when you just take something and just put the sponsor's name on there. And we know that that's really gone away because of what we're saying, like brand authenticity works. I want to talk to you about contracts. And speaking of brands, the creative briefs been asked that brands have, because one of the things I think is that oftentimes people don't always know that if a brand is going to give you money, right, they're going to usually have a specific ask. What advice do you have on understanding contracts and what's being asked of them, and how can athletes be aware of that? Because I would see that as a trip up potentially for athletes and influencers.
Yeah, there's a couple notable things. If we were to bullet point this, one, duration.
Mm,
What's the duration of the contract?
yep.
Two, is this an exclusive deal?
What does that mean when you say exclusive, Keith? What do you mean?
Great, great question. All right, so going back to some of the talks we've had about shoe companies, if you do a deal with a shoe company, they're likely going to say you're exclusive to us. You can't do a
Mm,
deal with another shoe company, and it
yep.
might even leach into apparel or, something else. Another popular example with exclusivity, one example I like to give is, you do a deal with a local mom and pop dining cafe, a coffee shop or something like that. And they put in the terms of the contract, hey, you're exclusive to us for beverages. Well, okay, I get it, but we're all one step away from being that next top 10, play of the day and getting that huge Gatorade contract.
Right.
You don't want to come back and say, I can't take the Gatorade deal because I got this exclusive deal with the local coffee shop.
Right.
Any type of beverage, so exclusivity, if somebody wants that, they should be paying more, because you're potentially cutting off something in the future, So that's really kind of the second point. Duration is really important. That was my first term and condition. I really like to talk about athletes. They're planning year to year. All right. If
Absolutely.
from your freshman year to your sophomore year, let's break this down because you're planning to get better, right? You are practicing, you're working hard, you're going to be better, you're going to earn more starting time. You're hoping to get more scholarship. You're hoping to increase your market, your follower count, everything about you as an athlete, as from that freshman to sophomore year, and you can, shift the years out however you want.
Right.
But everything you're doing is from a year to year basis because you're really trying to, make yourself better from year to year. So it's always baffling to me when I see some of these, student athletes that'll sign multi-year agreements. It's the same rate. It's like a flat rate for 3 years. That it doesn't take into account like all the hard work and effort that you're going to go through the years. Either it should escalate over the years. So when you're looking at duration, hopefully it escalates. If not, a 1-year deal is sufficient. And you can come back on the second year deal, provided you went out and crushed it on that first year. You can demand more on that second deal, which is
so basically you're saying so people need to read their contracts, understand what's being asked of them, right? Deliverables, length, when is it due? Right, that's a huge thing. If you went to an event on Tuesday and a professional team said, "Hey, XYZ student athlete, would you come out to our arena? We're going to give you the VIP experience that our premium ticket holders have, and then could you do a video and a photo afterwards and have it out within 24 hours?" Right, and then because if we don't have it out in 24 to 48 hours or whatever the contract says, that could be an issue.
And I think student athletes really need to think about this too, because if you're doing a deal with a national brand, chances are they got a marketing department.
Sure.
They've got folks that are going to tell you exactly what needs to be done.
Absolutely.
Right?
And they'll generally send that over via a creative brief, right? A creative brief for those. It's just basically a document that says, hey, as Keith, as you're saying, this is what we're looking for. This is the execution that you should have.
So no, on contrary to that, think about if you did a deal with a small little local diner.
Right. Yeah.
They don't have a marketing department. They don't.
Yeah.
The owner, maybe the cashier is running their Instagram page or something like that. They're going to have that savvy of telling the student athlete exactly what to do. So it's incumbent upon the student athlete to think about this and to be very creative and say, how am I going to execute on this and make this such a success that this diner is not only going to have me do this first deal, but they're going to come back to me for a second and a third deal. How do
I love that. I love that because what you're saying is so true, because one of the things too that you want to be good at doing this, and then also too, if you're doing all the things you're talking about, the end goal then too is that if the content works, that they come back to you, right? So that you're not searching for constant new partners all the time because either the content didn't work to their level of pleasure, or maybe the execution wasn't what they asked for, right? Didn't give them what they want, didn't turn it in the format that they wanted, right? Like they might have wanted a carousel for Instagram, but you didn't do it. And now we can't go back and capture it. So these are all some of the things, just like going to the NBA, the NFL, or becoming a professional, anything like these are the details that a content creator needs to know to be a professional content creator, right, Keith?
Yeah, absolutely. And I going back to the bullet pointed list. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's
Bring
also
us home, Keith.
let's talk about what happens if the deal goes, it's not what the student athlete thought it was going to be, or
Right.
all of a sudden it takes a little more time than what they had expected from the get-go.
Absolutely.
How do they cancel out? How do they opt out of that deal? All right. And I think this is eye-opening for a lot of student athletes. Some deals you can opt out very easily and you're just done. There's no penalty. There's nothing that you have to pay back or anything. But what if there is a penalty? If you're doing a
Right.
deal with a big national agency and they've invested 3 months into photo shoots and video shoots and branding and working up a marketing campaign with
Right.
the student athlete, and they're just about to launch, and the student athlete says, I don't have enough time to really do this. I don't want to do this anymore.
Is that
All
something
right.
that you think sometimes, Keith, before you do you see that sometimes?
I've heard student athletes mention it and talk about it.
Sure.
I've not actually seen it yet, but I think it is something important to consider.
Right.
Life
So
change.
basically, when you're being asked of something, calculating, is this something I can realistically execute out, knowing that you've got practice, you've got school life, of course, you have social life, you've got
Right.
all the things and the time constraints. So, no, I think that's a valid takeaway.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't want to try to opt out of something and be trapped into it, and
Right.
then let's say that national agency says, "Hey, we hear you, but we invested a lot into this. You're
Right.
going to have to pay us back."
Yeah.
Ooh.
Well, that's so key. So the key point of this, guys, read your contracts, thoroughly understand the deliverables, and then of course manage your earnings responsibly, the tax part of it, and hopefully saving you can have your own people, because the goal too is that we want people to be able to live the life of their dreams. So if you love this content and you like this, we ask you to smash that like button so that more people can find us and that YouTube and all of the streams know that we're doing a good job.
Be the story.